Welcome to Spilling Our Tea, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of Asian women who are rewriting the rules of success. We're all about sharing the real, raw stories of women who have started their businesses, overcame barriers, and are carving out spaces where we can thrive, not just survive. This podcast exists because I believe our stories matter. For too long, we've been overlooked and our struggles silenced. It's time we get seen and heard. Through Spilling Our Tea, I'm on a mission to support and empower Asian women by prioritizing mental health and breaking down the myths of the model minority and showing up as our true, unapologetic selves. I'm Sandy, a Korean Japanese American, first generation immigrant and third culture kid who's lived in 4 different countries, and I love eating. That I think is a hobby of mine, actually. I am also a coach, speaker, and your host. Spilling Our Tea is sponsored by Joyful Optimist Coaching, where we support founders and entrepreneurs who desire to make an impact in the world by building businesses that are abundant, centered, and joyful. And yes, you can be both successful and joyful. There is an upcoming half-day workshop that we are sponsoring that is on busting imposter syndrome and becoming a better leader. You can check out the details at joyfuloptimist.com. So on the show today, we have Grace Young Foster. Grace is the founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. At 3 years old, she was abandoned at a local market in South Korea and orphaned. Grace immigrated to the U.S. at 5 years old and ended up in the foster care system. And eventually, she was adopted. Those who share her lived experience face challenges finding belonging and inclusion, especially in the workplace. Through the Inclusion Initiative, she has created belonging for those who share her adoptee and foster care identities. Grace, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sandy. Thanks so much for that awesome introduction. It's great to be here with you.
I know there's more to Grace than that little intro, but I wanted to come from you. But before we get started, I would like to ask you 5 rapid fire questions. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes or lower your gaze, whatever you're comfortable with, and I invite you to allow your intuition to guide you in answering.
Sure.
You ready? All right. Have you ever felt the pressure to conform to expectations of being the model minority?
Yes.
Have you experienced discrimination or bias in your professional life?
Big yes.
Do you believe it's possible to achieve success without sacrificing joy?
Yes.
Do you prioritize mental health in your day-to-day life?
Yes.
Do you feel optimistic about the future for Asian women in leadership?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, Grace. The floor is yours. Let's begin with the Inclusion Initiative. Please tell us more about what you are doing and why it matters.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for providing this space to include the particular population of Asian Americans and Americans that I serve, which are adoptees of color and foster care alumni. And as we know, there are many, many Asian adoptees within the U.S. There's an estimated about 350,000 Asian adoptees that are transracially adopted. And the Inclusion Initiative is elevating the future of work for adoptees of color and foster care alumni through really providing the space to belong, to be seen, to be heard, but also to have the professional development and career building resources that just are not yet there in the workplace for our communities.
Amazing. And how did this come about? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, you shared a little bit of my origin story. And I'll dive a little bit into that story and how, my life unfolded to create this movement and this company that now exists. And when I came to the U.S., um, you'll be interested to hear that the first family that brought me over was actually a mixed race couple, white and Japanese. And so they brought over me from Korea because the dad had served in the Korean War. That was quite common, yeah, in the 80s, 90s. And it is really an unspoken experience for a lot of adoptees, not only Asian, but adoptees that are transracial, transnational like this, where they have experienced a whole series of traumatic events, right? They're either abandoned or relinquished or forcibly taken from their families. They're cut from all their ties of their heritage, their culture, their language, the food. Even just the food is such a big deal. And placed into homes of literal strangers that they had no previous connections with, that do not look like them, do not sound like them. And these children are coming into these homes as a lot of times, as the solution to whatever gap that family is experiencing. And that's not intentional on the family's part, but it is realistically what was happening, right? There's a lot of adoptions that occur because of infertility, or they want to complete their family of 3 into 4. And with my situation, that was the case with this particular family. They had 3 biological children. They wanted one more girl. They decided to adopt to make that family whole. And, the institutions, especially back then, I won't dive into the whole history of adoption, but, there's a lot of lack of information, a lack of really ownership of responsibility, right? Of truly understanding the trauma the kids come from, but then also how that impacts them, their mental health, their ability to integrate and move forward, even as young babies or young kids into these families. And so back then there wasn't a lot of, I guess, intentional education, right, around the mental health um needs of the kids, and also what the mental health needs of the parents were going to be and the families, because it literally upends everyone's lives. But as the adoptee, right, as the person, the child coming into the home that didn't choose this, right, they got to choose. I did not. They got to choose which country I came from. I did not get to choose which country I went to. They got to choose, my, if I was a girl, if I was a boy, the age, all of that. And I didn't get to choose any of that. And, because I was older when I came to the US, it meant, right, that I had these series of experiences, literally remembering, right, being relinquished, remembering the orphanages, remembering these transfers, right, of where I was never safe, never knew what was going to happen to me, all this kind of thing. And it translated into, just challenges that I face as a child that I couldn't really express. I didn't speak the language, right? I had to learn the language when I came into the States, and they put me into school right away. Again, putting me in more environments where I had to just adapt and conform and learn on the fly, instead of being allowed the space to transition and heal and really learn, right, what this new life meant for
Yeah.
me
And bond with the family,
and
right?
bond with
Like,
the family, right?
oh, wow.
Right. And so all that to say, after 2 years, they had brought me over with the intention to adopt, and they decided after 2 years that I was not for them. And I remember the day they told me that they were not keeping me, right? And literally 2 days later, I went into the foster care system and was transferred to a different home. And yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of things we could talk about around that experience. But this is more common than we realize. That has happened to a lot of people that are adopted in the way that I was. And I went into the foster care system, went into a foster home that literally had like a dozen young people, either adopted or they were fostering. And that family grew into about 20 people. And I ended up being adopted by that family. But I also saw foster kids come and leave the home. I saw adopted kids also relinquished in the home, like no, also experienced the same thing I did in that same home that I was placed into and eventually adopted. So you can imagine just the mental uh, navigation and the mental burden, right, that I had on my emotional health, mental health of going through these experiences. But again, because I'm transracially adopted, I was placed. This home was a predominantly white, in a predominantly white community, white parents. They had a lot of adopted or foster children that were of different ethnicities and races. So it was a multiracial home in that sense. But culturally, we're very white, right? And that is what we grew up learning and assimilating into. And the home just wasn't, my story is not a fairy tale, and I think a lot of people misunderstand what adoption really can look like. It's not perfect. It doesn't end when the kid just enters the home, right? Mine had a lot of layers to it even after. And I had a lot of challenges in my youth and growing up. And I think one of the biggest pieces, right, was never belonging in that community. We were always the different kids, right, in the schools, in the church, in the grocery store, right? We were always, we knew we didn't really belong, right? And even within the family, because there were so many kids, it was hard to really feel that sense of belonging, especially with kids constantly coming in and out of the home. And so I transitioned from that family at 17 years old and just made my way into the world. And it led to 14 years of just a really hard journey of trying to figure it out. So I transitioned into spaces that were still predominantly white. I lived in the Midwest and then transitioned into another space into the Midwest. And it was just predominantly white, the areas that I was in. So I still struggled with the lack of belonging. I still struggled with not even understanding, right, who I am, how I can show up in the world. I struggled with not having family support. I struggled with not having any sense of my biological family. And I struggled with years and years, like literal decades of rejecting my Asian heritage. I didn't want my Asian face. I hated it. I hated that I had to be Asian in my environments. And to the point where I internalized all this racism, all this self-hate that I had spewed at me all the time, either directly, right, or by our societal narratives that and how we talk about Asian Americans, how we perceive Asian Americans, right? There's just so many stereotypes that are harmful. And the model minority stereotype, it is harmful, even though it is looked at as, people sometimes look at it as positive, but it is really harmful, right? Because it does not properly represent the entirety of our community. So there are so many there's so many in our diaspora that come from all sorts of different backgrounds, and I experienced, not coming from a wealthy home, not coming into, not being able to uh, even think about graduating from college and getting into a corporate job, right? Like I experienced doing a lot of odd jobs and experiencing housing insecurity and food insecurity, just trying to make it. And so, like, this model minority myth growing up, right? I kept hearing, like, oh, you're Asian, so you're like, you must be super successful and you're so good at math and, all these things. And it's like, actually, I'm working for 4 part-time jobs, like just trying to make it. Like, I need help, right? But help was not readily afforded because I was Asian American. Plus, I was adopted, so people just assumed all these things, like that I had all these things when I really didn't. And so, that really caused me to struggle for such a long time. And I know it impacted my career trajectory. It impacted my wealth building. It impacted just my professional development, all these things. And today I stand before you, founder and CEO. I'm a graduate of NYU business school. Like I've had a good career and I've built a good career. And it looks like I've made it, right? But no one sees all of those years of what it took to get there and all the additional barriers to climb. And I knew that for me, even with all that I had been able to achieve, the privilege that I do carry, right, as someone that did receive an education, did understand how to navigate white spaces, all these things, I still struggled a lot. And there are so many people that are in the situations that I was in or have aged out of foster care that also struggle, but don't have the resources or privilege that I have. And I'm like, what is happening to those people? Like, if I struggle this much to get here, what is happening? Right? How are they going to find help? Right? And so I started searching for this kind of support system, resources, things that are really specific to my lived experience and what kind of professional resources that we need, but also the mentorship and the community and the network building that someone like me needed, right? Because I didn't have any kind of network when I left that adoptive home, right? I had to make it all from scratch. Didn't exist. And so here we are with the Inclusion Initiative being born. And that is the primary goal of what we're building, what we're doing, is to really close this opportunity gap to elevate and help us find each other as professionals so that we can empower each other, resource each other, but also find the things that we're looking for, including mental health resources at work, because there's so many things we go through as adoptees or foster alumni that we can't really talk about in the workplace. And so that really does impact the joys that we can find, right? Or how we navigate certain life events. And, we need these things as professionals as well as in our personal lives. So, that is that's the Inclusion Initiative in a nutshell.
What a journey. Thank you so much for enlightening all of us. I think I only knew surface level. Like I feel so naive because I remember having my first Asian, transnational adoptee friend when I was in college. We both worked at Express, in Boston. And there was this girl, Amanda, and I grew up in a predominantly white community as well. And I didn't have that many Asian friends. I could count on, one hand, maybe two, and so I was so excited, to have a connection with Amanda. But I just there's these little things like, oh, Amanda she had a Western last name, and all these little things. And I slowly started to learn, like, yes, of course, there's adoptees, and just understanding that experience. But I think not in the way that you've just shared now, just so raw and vulnerably, the pains. And, this podcast is about mental health as well, and prioritizing that. You've shared so many instances of the strains and trauma throughout your life that you've had to endure and overcome. Is there a way for you to explain to our listeners, like, what worked for you, or how did you overcome some of these harder mental experiences for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it was really hard in adulthood. I did go to counseling a little bit in middle school, but that therapy was really used more of a punishment tool, like a shame tactic, unfortunately, when I was younger. And so I did not seek true like mental health support as an adult because I had so much shame behind it, right? I had so much shame from what I was told in that space, that you're messed up, you're the problem, all these things. And it's just, that's obviously very harmful. I'm glad that the landscape is changing and that the narratives are changing for mental health support, for especially for young people who go through trauma. But so as an adult, it took me a very long time to be open to seeking that kind of support. But when I did, it was in my late 20s, I really started to recognize that this was an area that I mean, I always knew that it was an area of struggle for me, but because of my lived experience going through all these hard things, I was really good at muscling through. I was really good at putting on a mask. I think a lot of Asian Americans can relate to this, right? You put on that mask, you act perfect, you act like everything's fine, and you just push through. And I call this a forced resilience, right? It's not to be celebrated. Yes, I appreciate my resilience, but I don't celebrate it because of how I had to build it. And it was, I saw that it was doing more harm than good at a certain point. And I said, I need to get help. I need to understand what it is I'm going through, why I'm feeling these ways, why this is harder than it used to be, right? To push through and muscle through. And I muscled through with being so dedicated to my work and building a career. Out of necessity, but also it just was the perfect distraction, right? Like if I can become this and achieve this, then all of that I went through won't hurt anymore.
Yes.
Right. And I'll
no
finally
one's ever going to fault you for throwing yourself into becoming successful, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. And for me too is another layer of like, I will finally prove that I have worth on this earth. I felt worthless without it because I didn't have a family that cared about me. The society never quite accepted me, right? I was trying to be in white spaces as an Asian person who was very confused about my identity. Because
you've never gotten guidance.
No. And I wanted to be white, and that's how I acted and behaved. And I didn't know how to be Asian at all, except I was forced to wear it on my face. That was the only Asian thing that I brought to the table, was that I literally looked like it. I couldn't escape that. And it just, it got to be too much where it was impacting, right, my ability to find joy in things. And, I don't have the exact statistic, but people who are adoptees and people who are in foster care or have experienced foster care, they're about 4 times more likely to think about self-harm, to have suicidal ideations, and also to follow through on dying by suicide. And it is such a real statistic for me because, I lived through that experience with all those feelings and emotions, and I understand, right, how people with my shared lived experience can get to that point. And I didn't want to get to that point. And so it really was through recognizing, working very hard to understand why, my triggers, my reactions, how the past had really impacted my present ability to navigate through emotional trauma, just life things, right? But I will say the key piece of it for me, 2 key pieces. One was allowing myself to open up and be vulnerable and authentic with a partner who has been with me for many, many years. He and I have been together for 16 years. Took a long time to really get to that place of complete trust and openness. Me to him. He has always been to me, but that has been a huge part of the healing journey and a part of that self-discovery journey for myself, right? Like, why are things triggering me that are not triggering him? Like, why am I reacting to him like this when all he's doing is being kind, right? Things like that. And then getting to a place, I wanted to get to a place where I wanted to have children. And I did not think I could be a good parent. I was terrified of not being able to be a good parent, a loving parent, a well, how do you say, a well-balanced parent. And I was really terrified of that. But not having kids for me, it didn't feel like an option. And so I had to do a lot of internal work, right, about that piece of me and get the support and help that I needed professionally to come to a place where, happy to say, I have an almost 3-year-old now. So
yes, congratulations. Amazing.
Thank you. But all of that too was a part of this journey of building the Inclusion Initiative, realizing, man, I spent my entire career never being able to talk about any of this stuff to anybody, especially in the workplace, right? Like personal life, yes, a little bit here and there, like maybe close friends that I might have been able to trust over the years with this kind of stuff. But at work, never. But at work, it's like, that is where a lot of the triggers would happen, right? If you have toxic bosses, that people-pleasing tendency to where you burn out all the time, right? The overcompensating, overperforming to prove value and worth, like all these things in the workplace. I recognize it, but I could never talk about it, which really hindered my professional growth, right?
Yes,
because
it's unrelenting, right?
Right.
It's a unforgiving cycle if you're constantly having to prove your worth
and not knowing your worth, and then or not being able to handle it anymore, right? Where I would leave workplaces, which hinders like career trajectory, all these things. And so all that to say, right, all of these experiences has really helped inform why I wanted to build the Inclusion Initiative and like how I wanted to build it. That it really needs to be built by lived experience people for lived experience people.
So what I'm gleaning from what you just shared, Grace, is how important it is to get to this place, and everyone gets to it at their own time and journey, but to find either the right space or the right person, but to open up and start talking about it, and also start doing that self-discovery journey.
And also being honest with yourself about it, right? I was not honest with myself for a long time because I just muscled through. I'm like, I'm fine. I can beat this by just being a workaholic and achieving X, Y, and Z. And then every time I'd hit these milestones, right, it was never enough. And like that is not okay. Like I knew that was not okay. Like why is this not enough? Right?
And everyone will, you to be able to, like you said, be honest and recognize that. Very powerful. It might not feel like it at the time, but what comes out at the other end as what you're, a testament to right now, is a great modeling for anyone that's listening.
I think, one of the key pieces as well is I wanted to see and feel like what my partner saw in me. Like he, thinks I'm such an amazing person. Like, I don't think so. All I see is this messed up, like person that can't accept themselves. And I'm like, this is enough. Like he can see me like that. I have good friends that can see me like that. Like, why can't I see myself like that? And some of it is from just the systemic messages, the lifelong messages, right? Like you bring value to the family that picks you. Like you are fulfilling their family needs. Like that's the value you bring. So I didn't learn to value myself from the beginning. Plus the relinquishments, right? And separation from birth family in general. But that over time, like it compounds and you can start to just tell yourself that all the time. But when it came time to understanding, like I want to be a parent, like how am I going to do that? I was thinking, like, how am I going to raise an Asian American child to be healthy, nurturing, inclusive, accepting, a good person when I can't even accept myself or I don't love myself, not fully, So I had to be honest and get to a place of wanting to let go of the self-hate narrative that I had accepted and that had driven me for so long. And I had to be okay, right, with shifting into being a different kind of person that loved myself, loved what I saw, loved what I heard, like, just loved this my origin story, all of it. And that has been the biggest piece of the self-healing journey is now I can look at myself in the mirror or see myself in my daughter. And I love it all. I no longer am ashamed, right? So
there's so many questions in my head right now, but I just want to honor what you just said and just underscore the importance of the honesty to yourself and the willingness to shift the story.
reclaiming my narrative. Yeah.
Reclamation, reclaiming your narrative. And that is free and available to anyone out there who's experiencing that.
And that's the goal of the Inclusion Initiative, for us to reclaim our self-worth, our perception of ourselves, and empower ourselves in that way. But it's really hard to do it if you don't see people like you with your shared lived experience. It's near impossible. So, that's what we're building, is this network of people, amazing, incredible people that have that are in all types of industries and roles, right? But we've never been able to connect and be in community like that professionally before. And it just makes such a big difference in being able to shift that narrative, right? Because when you're seeing people that are actively doing it, or you can talk about it for the first time in a safe space where you feel like you belong, then that self-work can really start.
Yes. And I think that is, community is the cornerstone of how civilization thrives. And without it, without knowing that there are others that have those experiences and can understand and hear you, it can feel very alone. Um, Grace, I'm curious, what, going through what you've been through and now being at this spectrum where you're able to say, I love myself, and you can see yourself in your daughter, and just in this really, I feel the exuberance and health coming from you. What's something you'd be saying to your 5-year-old self?
Yeah, there's a lot of things, but yeah, I think if I could go back and stand in front of her and share something that she could hold on to, right, while she goes through all of that hardship and trauma, there was good too, right? There was also good, but it was always veiled through the lens of trauma. um, and I just remember like never quite being happy ever. And I think I would tell her, right, you will find joy, you will truly be happy when you understand that you matter, period, right? Just know you matter, period. I was never told that. And I was never shown that, right? Because I was always shuffled around from home to home. And then ultimately even rejected by the home that adopted me. So like I never felt I mattered. But had I heard that as a kid growing up, I think it would have changed my journey a little bit in a good way. So for everybody listening, I hope you're telling the people in your lives that they just matter, period. There's no condition, right? You just matter because you're a human being.
Yes, that's instilling that self-worth. Thank you, Grace, for that. I think that is a message that resounds not just for the adoptee journey, but for anyone and everyone. There's someone out there that really needed to hear that. And so I'm grateful for you for showing up and saying that out loud, because it will reach the ears that need to hear it.
I'm grateful for you for creating this space and being such a powerful voice and movement in your own right to, again, help us reclaim our narratives, help us be the change, right?
Thank you, Grace. We will share Grace's, the initiative, inclusion initiative on our website and below. But Grace, can you just let them know, how do they reach you? Who should reach you? I know it seems obvious, but again, just underlining, as our listeners are listening, like, who should be reaching out to you?
Thank you. Yeah. So if you're a person with lived experience as an adoptee or as a foster alum, we want you to be a part of our community, to be able to share in the resources and also be a light to others who share your lived experience through the Inclusion Initiative. So please reach out. And if you're an ally, if you're an adoptive parent, your friend, allies come in many shapes and forms. Yeah, we want your support too. We can't do this alone. So reach out to us and tell us how you would like to be an ally to our community. And you can find us at theinclusioninitiative.com. I'm on LinkedIn as Grace Young Foster. So please find us, and we'd love to hear from you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Grace. Your journey in incredible strength and vulnerability means the world, that you've been able to show up for us and share all of it with us, and that you've been able to also navigate your path to a place of joy and healthy resilience.
Thank you. Yes, healthy resilience. A chosen resilience.
Chosen resilience. Yes, that's a great reframe. So, for our listeners, my one ask today is that if you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone you know who will also find value. Sharing our stories and normalizing this conversation around mental health and how we overcome barriers is our powerful steps to take to greater understanding and greater joy. So be sure to subscribe, like, follow, whatever you need to do so that you never miss an episode. And please join our community so that you can connect and share and support one another and find one another. You can find us at joyfuloptimist.com/spilling our tea. So we're here to spill the tea on real stories, mental fitness, and the joy of living authentically. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Grace.